Asia's arms race is growing. Aggression has led countries in the area into a deadly game of keeping up with the Jonases. Beijing is nearing an initial capability to invade Taiwan. That's the warning from a U.S. congressional advisory body. On the other side, Taiwan is preparing for all possibilities with an advanced model of fighter jet. A record high number of Americans have died from drug overdose, and chemicals from China are playing a major role in it. Reports of discrimination in China's education sector, practicing a spiritual meditation system, may lead to teachers losing their jobs. And the German chancellor says her country was naive at first when it comes to dealing with China. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China is ramping up its military might, and other countries in the region see no other way out than to catch up. Tensions are escalating, heading towards an arms race across Asia. And when the presidents of the U.S. and China met at a virtual summit this week, Taiwan was a hot topic. Will Ripley has the details.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping meeting virtually this week as the world faces what analysts call a growing threat. An intensifying arms race across the Indo-Pacific, potential flashpoints across the region, raising the risk of a nuclear conflict, threatening the U.S., its allies, and the world.
If you have a serious conflict, you could end up with the nuclear weapons being used. And we're not talking atomic bombs, we're talking hydrogen bombs, and this is a different level of warfare entirely.
The world's most assertive nuclear power, China. New satellite images suggest Beijing is building nuclear-capable missile silos, testing more ballistic missiles than the rest of the world combined, the Pentagon says, including what the U.S. calls a potentially game-changing hypersonic weapon, a claim China denies. The Chinese Navy, now the largest in the world, with a catch. Most of their warships are small, but they are getting bigger. A new aircraft carrier in Shanghai could launch early next year, with technology rivaling the larger, more advanced U.S. carrier fleet. How long is it going to take for China's Navy to pose this credible threat to America's Navy?
I think they still need a lot of time.
Are we talking years? Are we talking decades?
Oh, yeah. 20 to 30.
20 to 30
years.
Full-size mock-ups of U.S. warships dot the desert in Xinjiang, possibly for target practice, analysts say. China also flexing its flight muscles, flying warplanes near Taiwan in record numbers. The island's leaders warn cross-strait tensions are at 40-year highs. Taiwan racing to modernize its military. New ships, more missiles, billions of dollars in American-made weapons, all to guard against an invasion Taiwan's defense minister says could be possible by 2025. A war that could involve the U.S. and other Democratic allies, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen told CNN last month in this exclusive interview. Is Taiwan's strategy to try to be able to defend for a period of time before other countries could assist?
We definitely want to defend ourselves as long as we can. But let me reiterate, it's important that we have the support of our friends.
Taiwan's closest friend, at least geographically, Japan, signaling support for Taipei, a thinly veiled warning for Beijing.
What could happen in Taiwan would likely be an issue for Japan, in which case Japan would need to respond accordingly.
Japan is staging its largest military drills in decades, moving missiles, radar, and troops to its southern islands, about 100 miles from the Taiwanese coast, sending ships to the East China Sea, the site of territorial disputes with China. Japan also facing a threat from North Korean missiles. Pyongyang believed to be ramping up production of uranium for its growing nuclear arsenal. South Korea speeding up its own weapons development, including submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Australia will get nuclear-powered submarines, part of a deal with the U.S. and the U.K. to counter China's rapid expansion, militarizing man-made islands in the South China Sea. Another military buildup in the Himalayas, the site of deadly border clashes last year between China and India, another nation with nuclear weapons.
A warning from a U.S. congressional advisory body. It says the Chinese Communist Party's capability is at an all-time high for invading Taiwan. And this despite the risk of U.S. intervention. The report also details the CCP's threats to the world. Here are the details.
The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, or USCC, on Wednesday released its annual report to Congress. The 539-page document highlights the increasing threats the Chinese Communist Party poses to the U.S. and world order.
This year, the CCP showed itself increasingly willing to escalate that competition into confrontation.
While the U.S. seeks to preserve interests without conflicts, the bipartisan advisory board warns that Beijing may have different ideas.
The Chinese are at or near an initial invasion capability, which means the ability to conduct the land invasion of Taiwan, even assuming American intervention, albeit at very high risk.
The report recommends the U.S. should increase deterrence by making it easier for Taiwan to purchase defense articles and deploying cruise and ballistic missiles in the Indo-Pacific, while warning that if China perceives a weak U.S. position, it could seek an opportunist invasion.
If they can accomplish assimilation on their terms with Taiwan, it will undermine America's credibility as a security guarantor in the region. So the implications for the United States are very, very great.
Besides increased security threats, the new report also highlights how the opaque nature of Chinese companies can put U.S. investors at risk.
They are looking to the U.S. and other Western sources of capital to help fuel CCP policies.
In addition to expanding investment restrictions on Chinese companies, the Commission also urges U.S. firms with activities in China to better disclose what they are doing there.
Stop saying, I don't want to disclose this. Stop saying, I don't like the light shined on my activities in China because it makes me look bad. Well, guess what? If it makes you look bad, maybe you shouldn't be involved in it.
The report concludes that the U.S. should design policies based on the realization that the CCP is a menacing adversary determined to end the security and prosperity of billions of people. It warns that otherwise we will continue to see a slow but certain erosion of democratic nations around the world.
And Taiwan is preparing for the worst. It just commissioned into service an advanced version of fighter jets.
Taiwan just got a major fighter jet upgrade with the help from the U.S. This is vital for Taiwan to protect itself in the face of continuing threats from Communist China. According to Taiwan's Air Force, after the upgrade, its battle force is now within the top 15 in the world. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen commissioned into service 64 F-16V fighter jets on Thursday. This is the most advanced version of the plane. It's equipped with a highly capable scanned array radar, allowing it to track more than 20 targets at a time. Tsai said the upgrade showed the strength of Taiwan's cooperation with the U.S. defense industry.
This is cooperation in the defense industries between Taiwan and the United States. It further strengthens our friendship. This also represents the steadfast promise of the Taiwan-U.S. partnership. I trust that in holding fast to democratic values, there will definitely be more countries with similar values who will stand with us on this front.
Beijing has been stepping up its threat by regularly sending combat formations into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, and the Chinese Communist Party has stepped up its rhetoric as well. Its head, Xi Jinping, told U.S. President Joe Biden during a virtual summit this week that challenges to China's claim over the island amounted to playing with fire. China's latest attempt to threaten is a statement from one of its spokesmen on Wednesday. He said the Taiwan Relations Act is illegal and invalid. The Taiwan Relations Act is a domestic law in the United States. Denying it could be seen as trying to interfere in America's domestic affairs. The law requires the U.S. to maintain commercial and cultural ties with Taiwan, and most importantly, to provide the island with enough arms so it can defend itself.
Taiwan currently has about 400 military aircraft. China has 5 times more. A joint military force of European countries may soon form for the first time. The European Union, or EU, is considering a joint army of up to 5,000 troops to intervene in a crisis, including threats from China. It will involve all areas, land, sea, and air. Foreign and defense ministers of the 27 EU member countries began debating the plan on Monday. And if everything is going smoothly, a final document will be settled by March next year. And the army will be ready by 2025. This would be the first time the EU creates a standalone military force that does not rely on the U.S. To counter China's military threat, the EU also aims to increase its presence on the seas in the Indo-Pacific region, including carrying out more drills and patrols. A new round of disputes in the South China Sea, this time between China and the Philippines. Chinese Coast Guard ships sprayed a powerful torrent of water at two Philippine boats as they were carrying supplies to troops stationed on a shoal. Manila's top diplomat said on Thursday that no one was hurt in the incident. The shoal lies in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, very close to the Philippines' coast, but about 1,000 miles away from China's coast. China has overlapping territorial claims with the Philippines, Vietnam, and others in the South China Sea. China claims almost the entire region and has transformed a couple of the region's shoals into military bases. Drug abuse in the U.S. is becoming deadlier than ever. According to the latest CDC data, a record number of over 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses in a single 12-month period. One of the most lethal drugs driving the epidemic is fentanyl, and a large part of the chemicals used for producing fentanyl come from China.
Provisional data published by the CDC on Wednesday estimates that 100,306 people died from drug overdoses in the 12 months ending in April of this year. This is the first time that figure passed the 100,000 mark. Compared to the same period the previous year, the number of deaths rose by 28%, and compared to 5 years ago, the number of deaths doubled. Synthetic opioids, mostly fentanyl, made up around 2/3 of the deaths. Drug cartels in Mexico often make versions of fentanyl with chemicals from China. Meth and other psychostimulants made up over a quarter of the deaths. Dr. Nora Volko, director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, told CNN, "What we're seeing are the effects of these patterns of crisis and the appearance of more dangerous drugs at much lower prices."
A U.S. government report says China is still the major source of illicit fentanyl and fentanyl-related chemicals in the U.S. That's according to an August assessment from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. China promised in 2019 to regulate all forms of fentanyl. However, a report from August 2019 says the U.S. seized enough Chinese fentanyl to kill 14 million Americans. People in China and Mexico collaborate to make and traffic fentanyl. A 2017 U.S. Congress hearing on the fentanyl crisis confirmed China is the primary source of illicit fentanyl and precursor chemicals. The precursors are then shipped to Mexican labs where the deadly drug is made. And the U.S. government report this year says the links between China and Mexico on fentanyl trade grew more complex. They even developed sophisticated money laundering operations. Beijing denies the accusations. The head of the Women's Tennis Association on Wednesday voiced doubt over an email the association received. In the email, tennis player Peng Shuai was said to deny her previous allegations of sexual assault. Flora Bradley Watson reports.
The head of the World Body for Women's Tennis says he's even more worried about the welfare of Chinese player Peng Shuai after China's state media published an email it says is from her. The 35-year-old tennis star has not been seen in public since she alleged on social media that former Chinese Vice Premier Zhang Gali coerced her into sex and that they later had an on-off consensual relationship. On Wednesday, Chinese state-affiliated media outlet CGTN released on Twitter what it said was an email Peng had sent to the chairman of the Women's Tennis Association, Steve Simon. In the email, Peng says the allegation of assault was untrue, but Simon has been quick to cast doubt on its validity. In a written statement, he said that, quote, "The statement released today by Chinese state media concerning Peng Shuai only raises my concern as to her safety and whereabouts. I have a hard time believing that Peng Shuai actually wrote the email we received or believes what is being attributed to her." The email which CGTN attributes to Peng says, "I'm not missing, nor am I unsafe. I've just been resting at home, and everything is fine." China's State Council Information Office and the Chinese Tennis Association did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Neither did a representative for Peng. On Thursday, China's Foreign Ministry was dismissive when asked about the email.
This is not a foreign affairs matter, and I'm not aware of the relevant situation you mentioned.
Peng was the first Chinese player to top the world rankings when she was doubles #1 in 2014. Zhang, who is 40 years her senior, was a vice premier between 2013 and 2018.
And netizens found a bug in the email, a text cursor. A netizen asked, did she forget to hit send? We can all see the cursor. Another netizen cast doubt on the email, asking if someone was just faking it and writing the email in Peng Shuai's name, pointing to the cursor on the screen. Knowing how to teach is only part of the requirements needed to work as a teacher in China. Educators also have to keep in line with the regime's political stance.
Many schools in China have recently started recruiting teachers, but job requirements for the positions make one thing clear: Falun Gong practitioners won't be hired. Falun Gong is a spiritual meditation practice that teaches the core principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. 2 decades ago, the Chinese regime launched a persecution campaign against the practice. Millions have been detained, tortured, and some have even died as a result. In September, a county in northeastern China's Liaoning province issued a teacher recruitment announcement requiring applicants to provide proof they don't practice Falun Gong. That proof also has to be endorsed by their local officials. That follows a similar notice in July. That's when a district in Hebei province issued an announcement stating that people who have practiced Falun Gong wouldn't be hired. Some universities also announced similar requirements. One of them is Daqing Teachers College. It asked its applicants to include a statement about their attitude toward Falun Gong and the regime's banning of the practice. If they don't support it, they won't get the job. At least 5 other universities also clearly required that applicants do not practice Falun Gong. Wang Fuhua is a Falun Gong practitioner from Hunan province who currently lives in the U.S. She was an elementary school teacher in China, but was expelled because of her beliefs.
Because at that time, I filed complaint twice, because we wanted to say that the CCP was lying and Falun Dafa is very good. So it is because of this the school expelled me based on a document issued by the Chinese Communist Party.
Wang pointed out that the Communist Party's efforts to block Falun Gong practitioners from working as teachers is related to its nature.
Because the CCP definitely wants to control its propaganda and armed forces. As to the propaganda, a teacher at the podium faces so many children. She will definitely teach the children how to behave. We as Falun Gong practitioners will follow the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. We know how great our traditional culture is, but this is not what the CCP wants.
The communist regime's discrimination isn't limited to the education sector either. It also impacts other professions, including public security, police, state-run companies and institutions, and even some private businesses. U.S.-based human rights lawyer Wu Shaoping calls it a systematic persecution of human rights.
The world's largest police organization, Interpol, is set to vote on a couple of vacant seats in its executive committee next week. One of the candidates is a leader in China's Ministry of Public Security. And now, the wife of a former Interpol president is speaking out against the Chinese regime 3 years after the authorities arrested her husband. NTD's Juliet Song has the story.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. The wife of a former top Chinese police official is calling for attention for her husband. 3 years after he disappeared, she has no idea of his whereabouts.
This has saddened me beyond the point where I can be saddened further. Of course, it's equally cruel to my children.
Her husband, Meng Hongwei, was a former top official in China's security apparatus, the same security organ that keeps the Chinese Communist Party in power. And she enjoyed the privileges that came with being married to a party elite. The turning point came in 2018. At the time, Meng was in charge of Interpol, the world's largest police organization. But he disappeared after a trip back to China. Later, Chinese authorities sentenced him to more than 13 years in prison. Officials say Meng took over $2 million in bribes, and that he squandered public funds to furnish his family with a luxurious life. Gao Ge stayed in France with her 2 children after her husband's detention. They're now political refugees, and French police protect them around the clock. That's after an incident that Gao suspects was Chinese agents trying to kidnap them. She now calls the regime that her husband used to serve a monster.
For today's China, they are the monster now because they eat their children.
Gao's family has experienced political trauma before. After the Communist Party took over China in 1949, Gao's grandfather was stripped of his business assets and later imprisoned in a labor camp. As for her husband, even though authorities announced his charge, Gao has no information on his whereabouts. In the meantime, she's also worried about her own father, who was diagnosed with cancer. Gao says she doesn't know how her father is doing right now, and she doesn't dare to think about it. Juliet Song, NTD News.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel recently admitted that some of her China policies might need to be reconsidered. She expressed regret in an interview with Reuters, saying maybe initially we were rather too naive in our approach to some cooperation partnerships. These days we look more closely, and rightly so. During Merkel's 16 years in office, trading with China has been a top priority. That's even amid concerns of China's unfair competition tactics and industrial espionage. To promote economic ties with China in 2013, Merkel opposed the EU's anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese solar panels. And in 2014, Merkel elevated Germany's relationship with China to a comprehensive strategic partnership, the highest level of bilateral relations. China became Germany's biggest trade partner in 2016, and Germany is by far the largest EU exporter to China. But this economics-driven approach has prioritized trade with Beijing over its domestic human rights record and impacted the international community's assertiveness. As a result, Merkel has been careful to avoid any open confrontations with Beijing. Many have criticized her slow and at times quiet response to Beijing's actions in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. She also shied away from openly condemning China's use of sanctions against German academics in March. Earlier in September, the German defense minister dispatched a German frigate to the Indo-Pacific to demonstrate the country's commitment to freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. Merkel reportedly also wanted the vessel to stop at Shanghai, so it wouldn't look like it was taking sides. But Beijing rejected their request. As Beijing becomes increasingly more aggressive in the international system, the tone toward China at the European level has become tougher. In 2019, an EU white paper labeled China a systemic rival. Other European countries, such as the UK and Lithuania, have taken even stronger approaches in their response to Beijing's intensified bullying. A newly elected German lawmaker seems not so naive in the face of lobbying from China. Erich von Molotky posted a video on his Twitter account saying he was dealing with lobbying letters, including an invitation from Chinese telecom giant Huawei to breakfast. His answer is very simple. He shredded it. At the end of the video, he tells lobbyists to come to his office for talks. For the sake of transparency, the U.S. labels Huawei as a national security risk and has put it on a trade blacklist. That's due to the company's ties to the Chinese Communist regime. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.